So a friend of mine today asked me a question. He asked, what is the fastest route to the non-dual state? What is the fastest way to get to the non-dual state? This is a very good question. So to begin answering, I'm going to tell a story that is a very well-known Zen story. So a spiritual aspirant goes and finds a Zen master, a Zen teacher who is said to be very good at leading people into realization, into awakening. So he meets the Zen master and he tells him, I want enlightenment, he says, in one way or another. And so the Zen master looks at him keenly, and then the man says, how long do you think it'll take? And the Zen master says, for you, 10 years. So this man who has searched far and wide for a Zen master who has the wisdom and ability to lead him to enlightenment, he's a little impatient. So he says, 10 years? And he says, well, I'll double my efforts. I'll work harder than any monk you've ever had. I'll work harder than anybody you've ever seen. And the Zen master says, oh, well, then it'll be 20 years. Right? So that's the story. I remember hearing this years ago, and I actually thought it was very uncomfortable to hear. This is a really skillful pointer that points directly to our identity as a doer. It points to and undermines our identity as a doer. If you take this story literally true, as literally true, then it can be misleading. Obviously, he's not saying that there is a direct relationship between how hard you work and how long it takes to realize enlightenment in a literal way. That's not what he's saying. He's actually working in that moment with the student or with the prospective student who is actually already becoming a student in this exchange, and he's through his wisdom and his experience, the Zen master, he sees exactly what's functioning in him in that moment, which identity is asserting itself, coming forward, which identity is moving him in that moment, and that's the identity of the doer, the attachment to the belief and the identity that I can make anything happen, that I can, through human will, through my sense of separate human will, exert my will on the universe or exert my will on life and cause what I want to happen. Now, outside of this topic, outside of awakening, it could be argued to what degree you have that effect and the value of directed thinking, positive thinking, empowering thinking, etc. But that's not what we're talking about. He's literally reaching into this man's psyche and grabbing this part of him that he's not seeing, this view he's looking from, which is the view of the seeker, the view of the doer, and he's pulling it out and he's putting it directly in his consciousness. He's making it conscious. But when that happens, it's uncomfortable. It's, to be broken out of your view is often not comfortable. Sometimes it is, often it's not. We don't want to let go of our views, especially the one of the doer, the one that can make anything happen, the one that can find the end to its own suffering, right? So yeah, this is very uncomfortable, or it can be very uncomfortable to hear, particularly if you're the kind of person who likes to work hard, who has high energy toward work, toward cause and effect and doership and volitional energy. We all have that somewhere in us, but if that's a primary part of your identity, or that part of your identity is asserting itself in an exchange with a Zen master who is as clear as this one is, it's going to be very uncomfortable when the rug is pulled out from under that energy. So this is a roundabout way of beginning to talk about the subject that was brought up, the question that was asked: what is the method to realize or live the non-dual state directly, as quickly as possible? He didn't say as quickly as possible, he said directly, which is a really great question. He's trying to take it out of time. I think he has very good instincts, and I know him well. He does have very good instincts. He has very good experiential knowledge of the non-dual state. He's touched into it for sure. So this is a very astute question. It's a very good question, but there's still that flavor of the doer hanging on. And I'm not singling out any one person. This happens to every single person along the path at multiple points. Some people are very overridden by this type of identity. Some people it's less prominent in their personality, but everybody will encounter this in one way or another. And it may be around different subjects, but everybody knows this process, this mental process, this thought, this paradigm, this thought loop of, but I can make it happen. If I work really hard, I can make that happen. What's the fastest way to get to? Okay, so obviously there's a paradox being set up when we talk about the non-dual state. We're not talking about something that you can get to. We're not talking about something that is somewhere else. That's, in a sense, the whole point. The non-dual state isn't the end of a journey. The non-dual state isn't a reward for hard work. It's not certainly not a paradigm. It's not a way of thinking or a way of viewing the world. But to go even deeper, it's not subject to the will of the doer. That might sound uncomfortable. It might sound frustrating. But it's actually really good news. And the good news is the non-dual state isn't a state. The non-dual, the term or the phraseology non-dual state is pointing to something that's never not been the case. It's always non-dual. Okay. People mean different things when they say non-dual. Specifically here, what I'm referring to when I use the term, I'm typically talking about the seeming subject-object paradigm, the subject-object spatial relationship, the subject-object construct of separation. It's the most fundamental construct of separation is the seeming subject self to an object world, life, my problems, my past, my future. Those are all objects to the subject of me that we never really look closely enough to see that it's not there. So that's how it works. So my answer really was, and typically is something along the lines of the direct path, the direct route to non-dual is to undermine the doer, to undermine the seeker. And undermining isn't, in the way I'm speaking, isn't an activity. It's not another doer. It's not another activity of the doer. It's not a goal. But we undermine it just by seeing it clearly, by seeing the nature of thought moving in this way. So at the moment I want to ask somebody or ask myself or self-inquire, how do I get to the non-dual state? In that moment, there's an availability for a clearer seeing. And that clearer seeing is, that's a thought. That thought just arose. I don't even know if it arose, but that's a thought. I can look at that as a thought, as a concept. I can see the conceptual construct. How do I being separate from everything, get to, which is in the future. It's not now. It's not here. It's not accessible directly in this moment. How do I get to there? How do I get to, and then, of course, the big joke at the end is the non-dual state, as if the I, separate from the there, and separate from the goal, and separate from the destination, can somehow work in a way to get to what that destination suggests is the non-dual state. Of course, the non-dual state is the natural reality in which the thought that seemingly brings into existence the subject and the object arises in. So the moment you ask that question and recognize you didn't ask the question, a thought arose. A thought was noticed. that is the non-dual state. That's the natural reality. This is the natural reality. So the direct path is there's no path. Sometimes when I'm starting to work with people on an awakening process, or they're in the process of awakening, and we start talking, and I can tell it's becoming more of an authentic interaction, and they're sincere and are in process of waking up in the relative sense. I'll sometimes say something like this: "There's nowhere to go." Kind of at the outset, these are sort of like the foundational pointers. There is nowhere to go. There's no path. The path is there's no path. There is no path. This is no path. Some people talk about the direct path. Others say, well, that's spiritual bypassing. You need to do a bunch of work. It's not, it can't be too direct. There's no path. It's not a long path. It's not a short path. There is no path, right? In the way that the mind operates around doership, or the mind operates around cause and effect as far as it applies to you, right? So yeah, you can just rest, not worry so much about having to try to get somewhere, imagine how to get there, and then imagine a strategy. There's no strategy. There's just noticing. There's no strategy. There's just this. There's just sensation in the feet, in the hands. There's just sound, the sound of the voice, the sound of the hum in the room. There's just the sensation of the chest rising and falling, the tingling inside the body, the pressure in the head, behind the eyes, in the throat, in the chest. That's all there is. It's the pathless path. A thought arising saying, this doesn't make any sense. That's what there is. There's that thought. It doesn't make any sense to who? To me. The thought says, that doesn't make any sense to me. But when you recognize, or when it's recognized, that thought refers to nothing but itself, it says it's about you, but when you inquire carefully, look closely, you see it's simply a thought. That thought could say anything, it doesn't change reality. And then it's gone, and another thought follows. So a certain kind of attention gets set up, and I would call it mind identification, or thought or concept identification. A certain kind of attention movement gets set up where we kind of jump from thought to thought to thought. And we move so fast we don't recognize we are not thinking, we are not the thinker, we are not the agent or the doer. That's seemingly implied by a movement of attention that is moving from thought to thought to thought very quickly, and not fully recognizing a thought as a thought. So when we slow down enough to see a thought is one thought, just this thought, fully here, not a problem, not about anything, not separate, not outside or inside, just thought, just consciousness, just sound, just sensation, just color. And you could say in a relative sense, if that's explored clearly, sincerely, and with some vigilance, some dedication, but also some openness, willingness to see a bigger paradigm, to experience something that is not what we're used to imagining, because it's more primary, it's closer, it's more intimate. We're open to that, then the non-dual state reveals itself. Very simply. It doesn't matter the time frame. The more you think about time frame, the more years the Zen master adds to your path. There's no need to. It's not exactly like that. It's not like you're punished for thinking about time or putting things in time. But the obsession with those types of thoughts, clinging to those types of thoughts, getting lost in the house of mirrors of thought without just stopping enough to see one thought as a thought, creates a sense of time. It creates a sense of urgency, impatience, creates a sense of me on a path, right? All of that. All those are thoughts. So again, attention simply rests here, rests in the body, rests in the senses, rests in consciousness, which is thought after thought after thought, but only one thought at a time, and you can start to directly experience that non-dual nature of thought and consciousness. That thought is seamless with consciousness. The thoughts arise out of consciousness. They fall back into consciousness. The sense of a self in there, the sense of a me, a light of your consciousness, of your awareness of thoughts, that awareness, that consciousness, that space that feels like you, that itself is not disconnected from thoughts. It's seamless with thoughts. The thoughts form, you could say, within it and dissolve back within it as the wave dissolves into the ocean. Once you start to directly perceive that nature, not think about it, not understand it necessarily, just to directly experience it in this moment, in one thought, in pure consciousness, not making a distinction between thought and consciousness, not picking and choosing one is better than the other, recognizing that they're just the same thing, really. And then they flow into each other, back and forth, back and forth. Thoughts, consciousness, consciousness, thoughts. That starts to feel can feel quite non-dual. You start to feel there's no separation anymore. There's no outside. There's no nothing fractured off, nothing missing, nothing lost. It can be quite peaceful. It doesn't have to be, but it can be quite peaceful. That's the non-dual aspect that you start to realize inside of thought and inside of consciousness, inside of that reflective consciousness. And once that non-dual state is penetrated, you could say, then an awakening often happens. And that is unmistakable when that happens. It's self-validating. It's not something you question. It's so obvious. It's the most obvious thing you've ever experienced. And you wonder how you ever missed it, because you know that it's fundamentally always like that. Then beyond that, awakening, now I'm kind of fast forwarding, but once there's been an authentic awakening, a shift in identity from a concepts to consciousness, you could say, to the sense of pure being, then a deeper knowing of what non-dual really means starts to come about, and that has to do with the senses. And I was kind of pointing to both simultaneously, but they tend to come in that order. Tends to be recognizing the sort of, you could say, non-dual aspect of consciousness, which feels like I, just pure I, not I am this or I am that. This and that can come and go. They come and go within I. Just a pure sense of I or I am is how some people describe it. That could be described as the non-dual aspect of consciousness, but that's not true non-duality yet. It gets more profound, more inherently the case, and effortless beyond that. So that's my answer to that question, at least for today. If you ask me again tomorrow or another time, I might answer it completely differently, but hopefully that's helpful to anybody who has had similar thoughts or similar questions. Good night.